Chains rattled against my wrists as two guards pushed me forward into the throne room. The whole court turned to look at me, and I heard someone laugh. I did not react. I had trained myself for years to keep my face still, no matter what happened around me. That training was about to be tested in front of an entire alien kingdom. My name is Cale Ashworth. A few months earlier, I was a soldier who had already seen more war than any person should. Now I was being presented like a piece of cargo to the royal court of the Thalmir Dominion, all because my planet had lost a small border conflict and needed to buy peace with something the enemy would enjoy mocking. "A gift for the princess," announced the court herald, his voice echoing across the tall stone hall. "A human male, to be joined in marriage with Princess Isolde Varen, as a mark of Earth's surrender and submission." Submission? I almost smiled at that word. If they only knew. I kept my eyes low, not out of fear, but out of habit. Looking directly at powerful people in a room full of weapons was never a good idea, even when you were the most dangerous person present, especially then. The princess sat on a raised platform beside her father, the ruling lord of the Dominion. She looked younger than I expected, with pale gold eyes and dark hair pulled back in a tight braid. She did not look pleased. Her jaw was tight, her hands folded stiffly in her lap, like she was holding back anger that had nowhere to go. I did not blame her. No one wants to be handed a stranger and told to marry him because of a war she had nothing to do with. "Is this truly the best Earth could offer?" she asked, not bothering to lower her voice. "A silent creature who cannot even lift his head?" The court laughed again. I kept my head down. Some of the nobles around her began to whisper. I caught fragments of words like weak, disappointing, an insult dressed as a peace offering. None of it bothered me. Insults were nothing compared to what I had already survived. I had learned long ago that words could not break bones, and bones were the least of what I had broken and rebuilt in my old life. The guards unlocked my chains and I stood there, rubbing my wrists slowly, careful not to move too fast. Fast movements drew attention. Attention was the last thing I wanted. "Come forward," the Lord instructed, his voice deep and commanding. "Let the princess see her new husband properly." I stepped forward, my boots echoing against the polished floor. Princess Isolde studied me with a look that mixed disgust and curiosity. Up close, her eyes were sharper than they seemed from a distance, calculating, searching for something. I made sure there was nothing for her to find. "You may speak," she said, almost daring me to embarrass myself further. "Or can you not do that either?" I considered my answer carefully. Silence had protected me for years. It would continue to protect both of us now. "I am honored to serve the peace between our peoples," I said quietly. My voice was calm, steady, and completely unremarkable. Just a soldier's polite line, nothing more. She blinked, clearly expecting something clumsier. A few nobles snickered at my formal tone, mistaking politeness for weakness. Let them think that. It made things simpler. The wedding, if it could even be called that, took place within the hour. There was no music, no celebration, no joy. Just a cold ceremony performed by an official who looked bored with the entire event. Isolde repeated her vows in a flat voice. I repeated mine the same way. Neither of us looked at the other more than necessary. When it ended, servants led us to a private chamber in the eastern wing of the palace, far from the busier halls where important decisions were made. I understood the message clearly enough. We were being kept out of sight, tucked away like an embarrassing mistake nobody wanted to look at twice. The room itself was simple but comfortable, with tall windows overlooking a garden of strange blue flowers I had never seen before. Isolde walked straight past me and sat by the window, arms crossed, staring outside without a single glance in my direction. "You do not have to pretend to be pleased," she said after a long silence. "I know what this marriage is, a punishment dressed up as an honor." "I am not pretending anything," I replied simply. She turned to look at me properly for the first time since the ceremony. "Then what are you doing? Most men in your position would be angry, or afraid, or at the very least, talking far too much trying to convince me they are worthy of this arrangement." "Talking rarely solves anything," I said. "I have found it is usually better to stay quiet and let time answer the harder questions." She studied me for a long moment, clearly trying to decide if I was foolish or simply strange. I let her wonder. It was safer that way. Over the following days, I learned the rhythm of palace life. Servants avoided speaking to me directly, most of them uncertain how to treat a human they had been taught to see as inferior. Nobles whispered whenever I passed, some openly laughing, others simply staring like I was an animal that had wandered somewhere it did not belong. I did not mind any of it. I had spent years surrounded by people who feared me for entirely different reasons. Being mocked instead of feared was, in its own strange way, almost restful. Isolde, however, remained a puzzle I could not solve so easily. She was sharp-tongued and proud, quick to defend her people's honor. Yet there were moments when I caught something else beneath her anger, a tiredness, a weight she carried that had nothing to do with me. One evening, I found her in the garden beneath the blue flowers, sitting alone on a stone bench. She did not notice me at first, lost in thought, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the cool stone beside her. "You walk without sound," she said suddenly, not turning around. "I did not hear you approach at all." "An old habit," I said, keeping my distance. A useful one, apparently, for a man who seems to prefer avoiding conversation entirely. I allowed myself a small smile, one she could not see since her back was still turned. Some habits are hard to break, even when they no longer serve a purpose. She finally looked at me, her golden eyes narrowing slightly. "You speak like someone far older than you appear. Most humans I have read about are loud and proud of their achievements. You are neither." "Perhaps I simply have less to prove," I said. "Or perhaps you have nothing to offer, and silence hides that fact rather well," she replied sharply. I did not argue. Let her believe whatever kept her comfortable. The truth was far heavier than anything she could imagine, and heavier truths were rarely kind gifts to give someone you barely knew. Word of my quiet nature spread quickly through the palace, twisting with every retelling until it became something close to legend, though not the flattering kind. They called me the Silent Beast, a joke passed between nobles who found my calm demeanor amusing rather than concerning. I let the nickname stick. It was useful, in its own way, to be underestimated. Lord Threxon, a noble who had once hoped to marry Isolde himself, made his opinion of me known early and often. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confidence that came from never once losing a fight worth remembering. He found reasons to appear wherever I happened to be, always with a comment sharp enough to draw laughter from those nearby. "Tell me, human," he said one afternoon, cornering me near the training yards where soldiers practiced their forms. "Did Earth truly have no one better to offer? Or did they simply wish to embarrass the princess further by sending their most forgettable soldier?" I said nothing, watching the soldiers spar in the distance, their movements clumsy compared to what I had once been trained to do. "Nothing to say as usual," Threxon continued, clearly enjoying himself. "Perhaps silence is the only skill Earth managed to teach its warriors." I let the words pass over me, like wind against stone. Reacting would only give him exactly what he wanted, an excuse to escalate things further in front of an audience eager for entertainment. "You are wise to stay quiet," he added, stepping closer, "since I doubt you could match even our weakest recruit in the training yard." I glanced briefly at the recruits sparring nearby, their movements telegraphed and slow by standards I once considered basic. I said nothing about that either. "Perhaps you are right," I said instead, my voice calm and even. "I have no wish to prove anything here." Threxon laughed, clearly satisfied with what he saw as a victory, and walked away with his companions trailing behind him, already retelling the exchange with exaggerated details that would grow more absurd with each telling. That night, back in our shared chamber, Isolde brought up the incident without me mentioning it at all. "Lord Threxon says you refused to defend yourself today," she said, watching me carefully from across the room. "Is that true?" "There was nothing worth defending," I answered. "He insulted you in front of half the training yard." "Words are only insults if I allow them to be," I said simply. I chose not to allow it. She studied me with an expression I could not quite place, somewhere between confusion and grudging curiosity. "You are a strange man, Cale Ashworth." "Perhaps," I agreed, though I suspect strange is far better than the alternative reputation others seem eager to give me. She almost smiled at that, though she caught herself before it fully formed, turning away toward the window instead. It was a small thing, barely noticeable, but I saw it clearly enough. A crack, faint and fleeting, in the wall she had built around herself just as carefully as I had built my own. Neither of us spoke of it again that night, but something had shifted quietly between us, small and unspoken, like the first quiet moment before a storm neither of us yet realized was gathering somewhere far beyond the palace walls. I returned to my silence, and she returned to her studies of Earth's history, searching through old records for answers about a husband she still did not understand. I let her search. Some truths were better discovered slowly, one small piece at a time, rather than delivered all at once like a blow neither of us was ready to survive. For now, silence remained my shield, and the palace remained blissfully unaware of exactly what kind of man they had welcomed so carelessly into their halls. The challenge came without warning, shouted across the great hall in front of nearly every noble in the palace. Lord Threxon stood at the center of the room, his voice booming with confidence, demanding I face him in a formal duel before the entire court. "Let us finally see what Earth's silent beast is truly made of," he announced, drawing murmurs of excitement from those gathered around him. Unless, of course, he intends to hide behind his princess wife instead of facing me himself. Every eye turned toward me. I felt Isolde stiffen beside me, though she said nothing, waiting to see how I would respond. I understood immediately what this challenge truly meant. A duel like this was rarely about honor. It was a trap, carefully designed so that whatever happened, Threxon would win. If I refused, I would be branded a coward forever, further shaming Earth and giving him exactly the humiliation he wanted to inflict. If I accepted and lost, the same result followed, only worse. And if I accepted and somehow won, I risked revealing far more about myself than I ever intended anyone here to see. I had learned a long time ago that every fight leaves a mark, not only on the body, but on everyone watching. I had already left too many marks on this world in ways nobody could see. I refused to leave another. "I decline," I said simply, my voice steady despite the sudden silence that swept across the hall. Gasps and laughter mixed together, a wave of disbelief rolling through the crowd. Threxon's grin widened, exactly as I expected. "Of course you do," he said loudly, turning to address the court. "Just as I suspected, Earth sends us silence because silence is all it has left to offer." I let the words settle over me without response, watching Isolde's expression carefully from the corner of my eye. Her face had gone pale, her hands clenched tightly at her sides, though whether from anger toward Threxon or embarrassment over me, I could not yet tell. That night, she confronted me the moment we returned to our chamber, her frustration finally breaking through the composed mask she wore so carefully in public. "Why would you refuse him?" she demanded, pacing near the window. "You allowed him to humiliate you in front of the entire court, and by extension, you humiliated me as well." "I understand your anger," I said calmly. "But a duel like that was never a fair contest. It was designed only to embarrass, regardless of the outcome." "You do not know that," she snapped. "Perhaps you simply feared losing." I considered explaining further, but the truth remained too dangerous to share so soon. Some secrets, once spoken aloud, could never be taken back, and I was not yet certain what kind of person she truly was beneath her pride and her anger. "Believe what you must," I said quietly instead. "I will not fight him." She stared at me for a long moment, clearly searching for something in my expression, some sign of fear or weakness she could point to and understand. She found nothing, because there was nothing there to find, only quiet resolve, carefully hidden behind years of discipline she could not yet imagine. She turned away without another word, retreating to her side of the chamber in frustrated silence. I did not follow. Some distances needed time before they could be crossed. Over the following weeks, Threxon's mockery grew bolder, emboldened by what he saw as proof of my weakness. He found new ways to embarrass me at every opportunity, from small comments during court gatherings to louder jokes shared openly among his circle of supporters. I endured all of it without complaint, though I noticed something shifting slowly in how others around the palace began to look at me. The palace guards, for instance, had grown strangely careful whenever I passed through the halls. At first I assumed it was simple distrust toward a human living among them, but I began noticing small details that suggested something different. They kept slightly greater distance than they did with other nobles. Their eyes tracked my hands rather than my face. When I moved unexpectedly, even something as harmless as reaching for a door, I caught brief flashes of tension in their posture before they caught themselves and relaxed again. Isolde noticed these things too, though she said nothing about it directly. Instead, her questions about me grew more frequent, more probing, delivered in quiet moments when she thought I might let something slip. "Where did you serve before coming here?" she asked one evening as we shared a quiet meal in our chamber, neither of us speaking much throughout the meal itself. "Various places," I answered carefully. "Earth's conflicts took me many directions over the years." "That is not an answer," she said, setting down her utensil to study me directly. "You speak of your service the way most soldiers speak of things they wish to forget." I paused, choosing my next words with great care. "Some things are better left in the past, Isolde. I am not the same person I once was." "And who were you, before?" she pressed gently, her tone softer than I expected. I looked at her for a long moment, weighing how much truth I could safely offer, without unraveling everything I had worked so hard to keep hidden. "Someone who caused far more harm than good, in ways I am not proud of. That is enough of an answer for now." She did not push further that night, though I could see the question lingering behind her eyes, unanswered and unsatisfied. Something had shifted between us since the duel, some quiet thread of curiosity that had not existed before, drawing her closer even as my silence tried to keep her at a careful distance. A few days later, I noticed something far more concerning during one of the palace's evening gatherings. A small group of nobles, unfamiliar to me, spoke quietly near the edge of the hall, glancing occasionally in my direction, before quickly looking away whenever they thought I noticed. Their conversation was too quiet to hear clearly, but their body language told a story of its own, careful and secretive in a way that felt entirely different from Threxon's open mockery. I mentioned nothing of this to Isolde at first, uncertain whether it was simple gossip or something more troubling. Old instincts, however, rarely stayed quiet for long, and mine had already begun sounding a warning I could not easily ignore. That evening, walking back toward our chamber through one of the palace's quieter corridors, I noticed a servant lingering near a doorway that led toward the private study of one of Isolde's father's advisors, a room that should have been empty at this late hour. The servant startled when he noticed me watching, quickly excusing himself and hurrying away before I could ask any questions. I filed the moment away carefully, adding it to a growing list of small details that, on their own, meant little, but together painted a picture I did not yet fully understand. Isolde found me standing quietly near the corridor a short while later, her expression curious. "You look troubled," she observed. "That is unusual for you." "Perhaps I am simply tired," I said, though I suspected she did not fully believe me. "You are a poor liar, Cale Ashworth," she replied, studying me carefully. "Something is bothering you, and I would rather you tell me directly than continue watching shadows in silence." I hesitated, weighing whether to share my suspicions or continue keeping them to myself. Trust, I had learned long ago, was rarely given freely, and even more rarely deserved without reason. Still, something about her tone, honest and unguarded for once, convinced me she deserved at least part of the truth. "I have noticed certain behaviors around the palace recently," I said carefully. "Small things, servants where they should not be, nobles whispering when they think no one is listening. It may be nothing, but old habits make it difficult for me to ignore such details entirely." Her expression sharpened immediately, all traces of curiosity replaced by something far more serious. "What kind of behaviors exactly?" I described what I had witnessed as clearly as I could, careful to keep my tone measured despite the growing unease building quietly within me. She listened without interruption, her earlier frustration toward me forgotten entirely as she absorbed each detail with obvious concern. "There have been rumors," she admitted finally, once I finished speaking, "whispers among certain nobles who resent the peace treaty with Earth, believing it weakens our standing among neighboring systems. My father has dismissed most of it as idle complaint, but perhaps he has been too quick to do so." "Perhaps," I agreed carefully. She studied me for a long moment, something new settling behind her eyes, a mixture of worry and something else I could not quite name. "You truly believe something is being planned?" "I believe caution costs nothing," I said simply, "and ignoring small warnings has cost people far more than caution ever could." She nodded slowly, though I could tell the conversation had left her unsettled in ways she was not yet ready to fully express. We returned to our chamber that night in quiet thought, each of us carrying separate concerns we did not yet know how to fully share with the other. I lay awake long after she had fallen asleep, staring at the ceiling while old instincts continued sounding their quiet warnings somewhere deep within me. Whatever was gathering in the shadows of this palace, I suspected it would not remain hidden for much longer, and when it finally revealed itself, silence alone would no longer be enough to keep either of us safe. The arrow struck the tree beside my head before I even heard the bowstring release. I moved without thinking, pulling Isolde down behind a fallen log as a second arrow whistled past exactly where she had been standing a heartbeat earlier. We were deep in the royal hunting grounds, part of a diplomatic gathering meant to celebrate the new season. Dozens of nobles scattered across the forest in small groups, laughing and enjoying the mild afternoon air. None of them noticed anything wrong until the shouting started somewhere behind us. "Stay down," I told Isolde quietly, my voice calm despite everything happening around us. "What is happening?" she whispered, her earlier composure completely gone, replaced by wide-eyed confusion. "Someone wants us dead," I said simply. "Likely me, though I suspect they will not hesitate to include you if given the chance." 3 figures emerged from the trees ahead, dressed in dark hunting clothes meant to blend into the forest, weapons drawn and moving with practiced coordination that told me immediately these were not simple bandits. This was planned, organized, and aimed directly at us. Isolde reached for a small blade hidden beneath her cloak, her hands shaking slightly despite her obvious attempt to stay calm. "I can fight," she said, though her voice betrayed her fear. "Stay behind me," I said instead, my voice carrying a tone she had never heard from me before, quiet but absolute, leaving no room for argument. The years I spent trying to bury who I once was suddenly felt very far away as old instincts surged forward, sharp and immediate, exactly as they always had during moments like this. The first attacker rushed forward, weapon raised, clearly expecting an easy target. I moved before he completed his second step, closing the distance between us faster than his eyes could track, disarming him with practiced ease before he even understood what had happened. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious, his weapon already in my hand. The second attacker hesitated, clearly unsettled by how quickly his companion had fallen. I did not give him time to reconsider, closing the gap and ending the confrontation just as efficiently as the first, careful to leave him breathing but no longer capable of continuing the fight. The third attacker, apparently the most experienced of the group, turned to flee the moment he understood what was happening, but I caught him within seconds, subduing him against a nearby tree before he could disappear into the deeper forest. The entire exchange lasted perhaps 10 seconds. When it ended, I stood among 3 unconscious attackers, breathing steady, movements precise, every part of me exactly as controlled and efficient as I had once been trained to be, years ago, in a war I had tried desperately to leave behind. I turned back toward Isolde and found her staring at me, completely frozen, her expression somewhere between shock and disbelief. The blade she had drawn earlier hung forgotten in her hand, her eyes fixed on me as though seeing me for the first time. "Kale," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "What was that?" I realized immediately what had happened. In my rush to protect her, I had let the mask slip, revealing exactly the kind of ability I had spent months carefully hiding from everyone in this palace. There was no simple explanation I could offer that would satisfy the question written so clearly across her face. "Are you injured?" I asked instead, deflecting for a moment while I gathered my thoughts. "I am unharmed," she said quickly, though her attention remained fixed entirely on me rather than herself. "But you moved faster than anything I have ever witnessed. You defeated 3 trained attackers without a single wasted movement, without even raising your voice. That is not the behavior of a simple soldier, Kale. That is something else entirely." I said nothing for a long moment, weighing my options carefully. Guards were already approaching from the direction of the shouting, drawn by the commotion, and I knew our conversation would need to end quickly regardless of what I chose to say. "We will speak of this later," I said finally, my voice returning to its usual quiet calm. "For now, we must ensure your safety and report what has happened." She nodded slowly, though I could see the question still burning behind her eyes, unanswered, and unlikely to remain that way for long. The guards arrived moments later, quickly securing the unconscious attackers and escorting us back toward the palace under heavy protection. Isolde remained unusually quiet throughout the journey, glancing toward me occasionally, with an expression I could not quite read, somewhere between fear and fascination. Once we returned to the safety of the palace walls, her father demanded a full account of what had occurred, gathering his most trusted advisors to discuss the security breach that had allowed armed attackers so close to the royal hunting grounds. I gave a careful account of events, downplaying my own involvement as much as possible, describing the confrontation as a fortunate combination of surprise and simple defensive instinct, rather than the deliberate and controlled response it truly had been. Isolde said nothing to contradict my account, though I noticed her studying me carefully throughout the entire discussion, clearly aware that my version of events left out considerably more than it revealed. That night, once we finally returned to the privacy of our chamber, she wasted no time addressing what had happened. "You lied to my father," she said quietly, closing the door behind her. "What you did in that forest was not simple defensive instinct. I have seen soldiers train for years and never move the way you moved today." I considered denying it further, but something in her expression told me such denial would only make things worse between us. "You are right," I admitted finally. "I did not tell your father the complete truth." "Then tell me," she said, her voice steady, despite the tension clearly building beneath her calm exterior. "I deserve at least that much, Kale. We are married, whether either of us wanted this arrangement or not, and I refuse to spend the rest of my life sharing a home with a stranger I do not understand." I sat down slowly, gathering my thoughts carefully before responding. The truth I carried was heavy, heavier than anything I had shared with anyone since arriving in this palace, and I was not entirely certain how she would react once she understood even a fraction of what I had once been. "There are things about my past I have not shared with you," I said quietly. things I am not proud of, and things I hoped never to reveal to anyone again. What kind of things? She asked, sitting across from me, her earlier anger softening slightly into something closer to genuine concern. Before I came here, I said slowly, I served in a conflict far larger and far more destructive than anything Earth has faced in generations. I was trained for that conflict in ways most people could never imagine, and by the time it ended, I had become someone capable of things I still struggle to accept. Her expression shifted, curiosity mixing with growing unease. What kind of conflict? What kind of training? I hesitated, uncertain how much further I was prepared to reveal in a single conversation. That is a longer story, I said finally, one I am not ready to share completely tonight. But know this, Isolde, what you saw in that forest was not the full extent of what I once was. I have spent considerable effort trying to leave that part of myself behind, and I have no wish to return to it unless absolutely necessary. She studied me for a long moment, clearly processing everything I had shared, weighing it against everything she thought she understood about the quiet, unremarkable husband she had been forced to marry. You are afraid, she said finally, her voice softer than before. Not of the attackers today, but of yourself. Her observation struck closer to the truth than I expected, and I found myself unable to offer an immediate response. Perhaps, I admitted quietly, some parts of myself are not easy to control once released, and I have caused enough harm in the past to understand exactly how dangerous that lack of control can become. She was quiet for a long moment, considering my words carefully. Yet today, you controlled it perfectly. You protected me without causing unnecessary harm, even to the attackers themselves. That does not sound like someone who lacks control, Kale. That sounds like someone who has spent considerable time learning to master something most people would never survive facing at all. Her words settled over me unexpectedly, offering a perspective I had not fully considered before. Perhaps my fear of what I once was had blinded me to how much I had already changed since those darker days. I appreciate your understanding, I said quietly, though I suspect this conversation raises more questions than it answers. It does, she agreed, a faint smile finally appearing at the corner of her mouth, the first genuine warmth I had seen from her since our wedding day. But perhaps that is enough for tonight. The rest can wait until you are ready to share it. We sat together in comfortable silence for a while afterward, the earlier tension between us replaced by something new, fragile but genuine, built from honesty rather than assumption. I did not know yet how much more I would eventually need to reveal, or how she would react once she understood the full truth of who I had once been. For now, however, something had shifted between us, quiet and unspoken, much like the crack that had finally begun forming in the careful mask I had worn since arriving in this palace. Later that night, after Isolde had finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, I stood alone by the window, watching the distant lights of the palace grounds below. Somewhere out there, whoever had orchestrated today's attack remained free, likely already planning their next attempt now that their first had failed. I understood, with quiet certainty, that this would not be the last time silence alone would fail to keep either of us safe. The mask I had worn for months was beginning to crack, piece by piece, and I suspected it would not be long before the truth I had tried so carefully to hide finally demanded to be told in full. Isolde burst into our chamber holding a data tablet, her hands trembling, her face pale with a mixture of fear and disbelief. Before I could ask what troubled her, she thrust the tablet toward me, the screen displaying old records pulled from deep within Earth's military archives. "Tell me this is a mistake," she said, her voice tight. "Tell me this is not you." I looked down at the screen and felt something cold settle in my chest. The record displayed an old military designation, faded and heavily redacted, but still readable enough to recognize instantly. Beside it sat a name I had not heard spoken aloud in years, a title whispered with fear across a dozen star systems during the darkest years of Earth's forgotten war. The Hollow-Handed. "Where did you find this?" I asked quietly, my voice steady despite the sudden tension gripping my chest. "That does not matter," she said sharply. "Answer my question, Kale. Is this you?" I set the tablet down carefully, meeting her eyes directly for the first time since this conversation began. There was no point denying it any longer. The truth had finally caught up to both of us, exactly as I had feared it eventually would. "Yes," I said simply. "That is me." She sat down slowly, processing the confirmation with visible difficulty. The records describe a soldier responsible for ending an entire war almost single-handedly. They describe someone capable of destroying fortified positions alone, someone feared by entire fleets, someone whose name alone caused enemy commanders to surrender rather than face him directly. The records exaggerate certain details, I said quietly, but the core of what they describe is accurate. Exaggerate, she repeated, disbelief coloring her voice. Kyle, they describe you ending conflicts that lasted generations, in a matter of months. They describe casualties on a scale I struggle to fully comprehend, and you have been living quietly among us for months, allowing everyone, including me, to believe you were nothing more than an unremarkable soldier sent here as punishment. I remained silent for a long moment, gathering the words I had avoided speaking for far too long. There is a difference between what I was capable of, and what I chose to do with that capability, I said finally. The war ended because I made choices I still carry with me every day. Choices that saved countless lives, but at a cost I am not proud of. What kind of cost? She asked quietly. I took a slow breath, allowing myself to finally share what I had hidden for so long. During the final years of the conflict, Earth faced an enemy far more advanced and far more numerous than anything our forces could match through conventional means. I was recruited into a specialized program designed to create soldiers capable of turning the tide of battles single-handedly. The training was brutal, transforming ordinary soldiers into something far beyond typical human capability. And it worked, she said quietly. It worked, I confirmed. By the end of the war, I had become exactly what the program intended, capable of ending conflicts that would have otherwise cost thousands of additional lives. But that capability came at a personal cost I have struggled with ever since. I do not regret ending the war when I did. I regret everything the war forced me to become in order to end it. She studied me carefully, her earlier fear slowly giving way to something more complicated. Is that why you have hidden yourself here? Why you allowed the entire court to mock you as weak and unremarkable? Partly, I admitted. After the war ended, I promised myself I would never again become that person unless absolutely necessary. Silence became easier than explaining a past most people would never understand. And frankly, being underestimated has proven useful more than once since arriving here. She was quiet for a long moment, absorbing everything I had shared. The attackers in the forest, she said finally. Do you believe they knew who you truly were? I doubt it, I said. If they had known, I suspect they would have approached the situation very differently, likely avoiding direct confrontation altogether. Then who were they working for? She asked, her earlier fear returning with new urgency. And why target us at all? Before I could answer, a sharp knock interrupted our conversation, followed immediately by one of the palace guards entering without waiting for permission, his expression tense and urgent. Forgive the intrusion, he said quickly, addressing Isolde directly. But you must come immediately. Lord Threxon has been arrested attempting to flee the palace grounds. He was found with communication devices linking him to an outside fleet preparing to enter our system. Isolde rose immediately, her earlier vulnerability replaced instantly by sharp royal authority. Take me to him, she commanded. We followed the guard through the palace corridors toward the security wing, where Threxon sat restrained within a heavily guarded holding chamber, his earlier confidence completely gone, replaced by barely concealed panic. Explain yourself, Isolde demanded the moment we entered, her voice cold and commanding. Threxon's eyes flicked briefly toward me, before returning to Isolde, clearly calculating whether honesty or further deception would serve him better in this moment. You do not understand the danger your father has placed us all in, he said finally. This treaty with Earth weakens our standing among neighboring systems. I sought only to protect our people by aligning with allies who share that concern. Allies, Isolde repeated sharply. You mean the fleet currently approaching our system, likely intending far more than simple protection? Threxon said nothing, his silence confirming what we already suspected. You orchestrated the attack in the forest, I said quietly, stepping forward for the first time since entering the chamber. Threxon's eyes met mine directly, and for the first time since I had known him, I saw genuine fear behind his earlier bravado. I did not know what you truly were, he admitted quietly. I believed you an easy target, someone whose death could be blamed on bandits, further embarrassing Earth and weakening the treaty from within. And the fleet approaching now, Isolde said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. What exactly do they intend once they arrive? They intend to remove your father from power, Threxon admitted finally, installing a ruler more willing to abandon this treaty entirely, along with anyone associated with maintaining it. The implications settled heavily over the room. This was no longer a simple matter of court politics or personal humiliation. An entire fleet was preparing to seize control of the Dominion, and Isolde, along with her father and everyone loyal to the current peace, stood directly in their path. How long until they arrive? I asked quietly. Within 2 days, Threxon admitted. Perhaps sooner, depending on how quickly they receive confirmation that their allies within the palace have secured their positions. Isolde turned to me immediately, her expression a mixture of fear and desperate hope. Kale, if what you told me earlier is true, if you truly possess the capability those records describe, we may need exactly that capability now more than ever. I understood immediately what she was asking, and the weight of that request settled heavily across my shoulders. Everything I had worked to leave behind, every promise I had made to myself after the war ended, stood directly opposed to what circumstances now demanded of me. I made a promise to myself, I said quietly, that I would never again become that person, unless absolutely necessary. And is this not necessary? She asked, her voice steady despite the fear clearly present beneath it. My people, my father, everyone within these walls, stand directly in danger from a threat only you may be capable of stopping. I looked at her for a long moment, weighing everything I had avoided for months, against everything now clearly at stake. The silence I had relied upon for so long suddenly felt inadequate against a threat this large, this immediate, this dangerous. I need time to prepare, I said finally, my decision settling quietly into place, despite the discomfort it brought. And I need your father to understand exactly what kind of response this threat will require. Isolde nodded immediately, already turning to address the guards regarding preparations for informing her father of everything we had just learned. As she moved toward the door, she paused, turning back to look at me directly. Thank you, she said quietly, for trusting me with the truth, even knowing how difficult that truth was to share. Thank you, I replied, for choosing to see beyond what that truth revealed. She offered a small, genuine smile before continuing through the door, leaving me alone for a moment with Threxen, still restrained within the holding chamber. You truly are what the records describe, he said quietly, his earlier arrogance completely gone. I underestimated you badly. Many people have, I said simply. Few have lived long enough afterward to regret it as thoroughly as you likely will. I left the chamber without waiting for his response, my thoughts already turning toward preparations for what was coming. The fleet approaching this system carried intentions far beyond simple political maneuvering, and I understood with quiet certainty that silence alone would no longer be sufficient to protect the people I had slowly, unexpectedly, come to care about. That evening, standing alone once again by the chamber window, I allowed myself to finally acknowledge what months of careful silence had been unable to prevent. The person I once was, the person I had worked so hard to leave behind, was about to return, not because I desired it, but because circumstances demanded nothing less. Somewhere within the palace, Isolde was informing her father of everything we now understood, preparing the Dominion's limited defenses against a threat that would arrive within days. And somewhere beyond the edges of this system, an enemy fleet continued its approach, entirely unaware of exactly what kind of resistance awaited them once they finally arrived. The mask I had worn since arriving in this palace had finally shattered completely, and what remained beneath it was preparing, quietly and deliberately, for a battle unlike anything this court had ever witnessed. The alarms tore through the palace before dawn, sharp and relentless, echoing through every corridor as the enemy fleet finally arrived above the Dominion's homeworld. I was already awake, standing near the window, watching distant streaks of light descend through the atmosphere toward the palace grounds below. Isolde rushed into the room moments later, already dressed for whatever came next, her expression a careful mask of calm, despite the fear clearly visible beneath it. They are here, she said quietly, faster than we expected. I know, I said, turning away from the window. It is time. She studied me for a long moment, searching for any trace of hesitation in my expression. She found none. Whatever internal conflict I had carried over the past 2 days had settled into quiet resolve, the kind of stillness I remembered from years ago, before every major confrontation I had ever faced. Are you ready? She asked softly. I have never truly stopped being ready, I admitted. I simply stopped wanting to be. She nodded, understanding settling behind her eyes, before reaching out and gently taking my hand. Whatever happens today, thank you for choosing to stand with us, rather than simply protecting yourself. You are not simply someone I am protecting, I said quietly. You are my wife, Isolde. That means something to me now, whether either of us expected it to or not. Her eyes softened briefly before the moment was interrupted by another guard rushing into the chamber, urgency written across his face. The outer defenses have fallen, he reported. Enemy forces are already moving through the lower gardens, along with several palace nobles who have apparently sided with the invaders. Threxen's allies, Isolde said grimly. Stay close to your father, I told her, moving toward the door. Keep the guards near the throne room secure. I will handle the rest. Kale, she said, catching my arm briefly before I could leave. Please, be careful. I will do my best, I said honestly, before finally stepping through the door and out into the chaos unfolding throughout the palace. The corridors were filled with confusion, palace guards attempting to organize a defense against an enemy far better equipped, and far more numerous than anything the Dominion's standing forces had faced in generations. I moved quickly through the chaos, my earlier caution replaced entirely by the quiet efficiency I had spent months trying to forget. The first group of invaders I encountered numbered 6, heavily armored and moving with practiced coordination through one of the palace's main corridors. They noticed me a moment too late, their weapons raised just as I closed the distance between us. What followed lasted only seconds, each movement precise and controlled, disarming and subduing them one after another before they could fully understand what was happening. I moved onward, following the sounds of continued fighting deeper into the palace, encountering resistance at nearly every turn. Each confrontation followed the same pattern, invaders confident in their numbers and equipment, quickly overwhelmed by a response they had never anticipated facing. I made certain, wherever possible, to disable rather than destroy, remembering the promise I had made to myself so long ago, even as circumstances forced me back into a role I had hoped never to revisit. Word of my presence spread quickly among the remaining invaders, their earlier confidence replaced by growing hesitation as reports filtered back describing a single defender capable of dismantling entire squads without apparent effort. By the time I reached the palace's central courtyard, where the largest concentration of enemy forces had gathered, many had already begun reconsidering their commitment to the assault entirely. Their commander, a tall figure in dark ceremonial armor, stood near the courtyard's center, directing the remaining forces with clear frustration at how quickly their advance had stalled. He turned toward me as I entered the courtyard, his expression shifting from confusion to something closer to recognition. "The hollow-handed," he said slowly, disbelief coloring his voice. I had believed those stories exaggerated beyond reality. "Believe what you wish," I said quietly, "but I suggest ordering your remaining forces to withdraw, before this confrontation becomes considerably more costly than your employers anticipated." He studied me for a long moment, clearly weighing his options carefully. "You cannot possibly stand against our entire remaining force alone," he said finally, though uncertainty had crept clearly into his voice. "Perhaps not entirely alone," I said, "but I suspect your soldiers have already witnessed enough to understand exactly how costly testing that theory further would become." Several of the nearby soldiers exchanged uncertain glances, clearly recalling reports from their fallen companions throughout the palace. The commander noticed their hesitation, his earlier confidence visibly cracking under the weight of it. Before he could respond further, a familiar voice rang out from the courtyard entrance behind me. Lord Threxon, no longer restrained, stood flanked by several palace guards, his expression a mixture of desperation and something that looked remarkably like regret. "Call off your forces," Threxon announced loudly, addressing the enemy commander directly. "This assault was meant to be swift and decisive, not a prolonged confrontation against an opponent capable of this. Continuing further will only cost your people lives for nothing." The commander turned toward Threxon with visible anger. "You promised us an easy victory, Threxon. Instead, we find ourselves facing a legend we were assured no longer existed." "I was wrong," Threxon admitted, his voice heavy with the weight of that admission. "I underestimated exactly what Earth's silence truly protected, and I have no wish to see more lives lost because of my mistake." The commander hesitated, clearly recalculating his options in light of Threxon's unexpected reversal. Finally, after a long, tense moment, he raised his hand, signaling the remaining forces to stand down. "This is not finished," he said, turning back toward me, "but I have no wish to lose additional soldiers over a conflict already lost." I said nothing further as the invading forces began their slow, reluctant withdrawal from the courtyard, their earlier confidence completely replaced by careful caution. Reinforcements from the palace's remaining defenders arrived shortly afterward, quickly securing the retreating enemy forces and beginning the process of restoring order throughout the grounds. Threxon approached me slowly once the immediate danger had passed, his expression carrying none of the earlier arrogance I had grown accustomed to seeing from him. "I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "Several apologies, in fact, though I understand if you have no wish to accept them." I studied him for a long moment, remembering everything he had done, from his earlier mockery to his role in orchestrating the very threat we had just survived. "You endangered many lives with your choices," I said finally, including the life of someone I have come to care for deeply. I know, he admitted, and I understand if the consequences of those choices fall heavily upon me now. I considered my next words carefully, remembering the promise I had made to myself so long ago, a promise about choosing mercy wherever possible, even toward those who had wronged me. Your choices were foolish and dangerous and nearly cost this palace everything, I said. But you also chose, in the end, to call off an assault you helped create, at considerable personal risk. That choice matters. Threxen looked at me with visible surprise. You intend to show me mercy, after everything I have done? I intend to let the Dominion's laws determine your punishment fairly, I said, rather than allowing my own anger to decide your fate instead. I have caused enough harm in my life already, Threxen. I have no wish to add unnecessary suffering to that count simply because I am capable of inflicting it. He said nothing further, though his expression carried a weight of genuine gratitude I had not expected to see from him. The following hours passed in a blur of organized recovery, palace guards securing the grounds while healers attended to the wounded throughout the corridors. I found Isolde eventually within the throne room, standing beside her father, both of them overseeing the restoration of order with visible relief. She turned the moment she noticed me entering, relief flooding her expression as she crossed the room quickly to meet me. You are unharmed, she said, relief evident in her voice. I am, I confirmed. The invading forces have withdrawn. The immediate threat has passed. Her father, watching our exchange with careful interest, stepped forward slowly. The reports I have received describe a defender capable of turning back an entire invasion force nearly single-handedly, he said. I understand now why Earth was reluctant to reveal exactly what kind of soldier they were sending us. I did not wish for this to become widely known, I admitted. I hoped simply to live quietly, without the burden my past capabilities have always carried with them. And yet, he said, your willingness to reveal that truth, when circumstances demanded it, likely saved countless lives throughout this palace today. That is not a burden to regret, Cale Ashworth. That is a gift, one this Dominion owes considerable gratitude toward. I did not know how to respond immediately, unaccustomed to receiving gratitude rather than fear for what I had once been trained to become. Isolde, sensing my hesitation, gently took my hand once again, offering quiet reassurance without needing to speak a single word. In the days that followed, news of the failed invasion spread throughout the Dominion, along with quiet whispers regarding exactly who had ended the threat so decisively. Rather than the mockery I had endured for months, I found myself greeted with cautious respect. Nobles who had once laughed openly now choosing their words far more carefully whenever I passed. Isolde, for her part, made no effort to hide her growing affection toward me, standing proudly beside me during official gatherings, rather than maintaining the careful distance we had once shared. The court, slowly adjusting to this new understanding, began treating our marriage not as the humiliating punishment it once appeared to be, but as something far more significant, a genuine alliance built upon mutual respect rather than forced obligation. One evening, several weeks after the invasion had been fully repelled, I found Isolde once again seated beneath the blue flowers in the palace garden, exactly where I had first noticed the quiet crack beginning to form in both our carefully guarded exteriors. You have grown quieter again, she observed as I sat down beside her, though I suspect it means something different now than it once did. Perhaps, I agreed. I once used silence to hide who I truly was. Now I suppose I use it simply to enjoy peace I never expected to find again. She smiled softly, leaning gently against my shoulder. I am glad you found that peace here, Cale. Whatever circumstances first brought us together, I do not regret how far we have come since. Neither do I said honestly. And for the first time since arriving in this palace, I meant those words completely. The silence between us that evening carried none of the careful guardedness it once held. Instead, it settled comfortably around us both, the quiet understanding of two people who had finally learned to trust each other completely, regardless of whatever legends or fears the wider galaxy still whispered about the man once known only as the Silent Human.